For Donald Trump, there's always a domestic equation to all of this. The cost of living is already high in the United States. The longer this war drags on, the more expensive it gets for Americans, and Americans are the ones that will pay for it. Mick Mulvaney is a former chief of staff to Donald Trump in his first term. This is what he had to say about the cost of war and perhaps the dwindling support that will come.
I think it's starting to resonate with people here that this is not going away. Keep in mind, Donald Trump's previous sort of overseas expeditions have included, a strategic raid on the Natanz nuclear facility. That was one and done. Plucking President Maduro out of Venezuela, bringing him to New York and replacing him with a vice president. That was one and done. This is looking more and more like it is not one and done, Laura. In fact, I was reading over the weekend here that the American promise of security through the Straits of Hormuz, using our Navy to guarantee the free flow of oil through that critical marine junction, could take several weeks for the United States military to put into place. That contemplates a war then that's going on for at least several weeks. So yeah, I think it's starting to resonate with people here that this is not another one and done. That this is a much more serious and different sort of thing. The Republican base that adores Donald Trump will give him more slack than certainly the Democrats will. But generally speaking, people think about and vote with their pocketbooks.
Let's go live to former Australian ambassador to the US, Joe Hockey. Joe, great to see you. First of all, we hear from reporters in Canberra that we've been asked to possibly help some of the Gulf states. They're citing national security, so we don't have a lot of detail. But from your understanding, what support can we offer there? What is our expertise?
Well, we have significant military expertise. The question is, what we're deployed for. And I would think it would be partly about surveillance, about early warning. We have extensive military capability in early warning devices, and also just having a presence there. There is no doubt a lot of Middle Eastern states are looking for allies and friends at this moment. And frankly, I think it'd be a good thing for us to be there.
Yeah, it has. We always pull our weight, we punch above it, and we proved that for almost 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, absolutely. When it comes to public support for this conflict at the moment, Mr. Hockey, is it about 50-50 in the US? Might that be the high watermark, though, for Trump as this cost of living crisis gets worse?
Well, there really are no popular wars. And despite the narrative being that this is some sort of military conflict, it is a war. There is a cost in both life and a real cost every day. Although until boots really hit the ground, it's not going to be hugely expensive for the United States. Until now, they've had to deploy long-range missiles and very sophisticated technology, costing millions and millions of dollars for each device to take out a $100,000 device held by the Iranians.
Yeah.
Because they have military superiority in the air, they can now use much cheaper devices, simpler bombs, if you like, to take out much more expensive devices on the ground. So the economics of the conflict will change, and they will change again if, as is reported right now here in Washington, D.C., there are going to be boots on the ground. Now, there is no appetite.
Is that reports coming through to Washington that there will be US boots on the ground?
That is the expectation at the moment, and people I have spoken to have suggested that there will have to be boots on the ground to have regime change. And this is a key thing, Laura, that there is no doubt that Israel is determined to have regime change in Iran. For the United States, I don't think Donald Trump has been particularly committed to regime change as much as he has been committed to removing the threat of nuclear weapons and the capacity of Iran to do damage to US military bases and the US mainland. So there are different priorities between Israel and the United States over the next few weeks, which will emerge. In addition, it is quite obvious that Israel and the United States are working very closely and in fact even have combined command structures at the moment to make sure that they don't miss or they miss as few targets as possible within Iran. But as we progress over the next few days, there's going to be a different ambition between Israel and the United States for what they want with regime change, and also, importantly, how they close down the Strait of Hormuz, or reopen them, if you like. There is an island that is absolutely crucial in that strait, and I wouldn't be surprised if the United States deploys some of its elite teams to take that island and give them a chance to reopen the flow of oil through the Straits of Hormuz.
Mr. Hockey, how quickly is it expected that American boots will be on Iranian soil?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the next week we see some American boots on the ground.
Wow.
It is extremely sensitive for Israel to have boots on the ground in Iran, but there may be some room for very limited engagement by the United States on the ground, particularly focused on obtaining any remaining nuclear weapons or nuclear equipment that Iran has, but also in an attempt to reopen the Straits of Hormuz.
Right.
As Mick Mulvaney, who's a consultant to my firm, said a little bit earlier, once the price of oil starts rising dramatically here in the United States, with the midterm elections around the corner, there will be a visceral reaction, not just amongst the general populace, but also Donald Trump will be facing it from his own MAGA base, who are very sensitive to issues relating to cost of living.
Mr. Hockey, when we talk about boots on the ground, I mean, I'm just on the run here as you've brought this report to us. That's the first we have seriously heard of it because, you know, just late last week, Trump said, well, I wouldn't rule it out. The White House press secretary was really trying to walk that back a little bit, saying, look, it's an option, but it's certainly not being discussed at the moment. This here, what you've brought us, is a significant development. It also coincides with reports out of Israel today that they believe that the Iranians are moving some of these nuclear facilities out of reach of their missiles. So is that a coincidence, do you think?
No, and it's not a coincidence that leave has been cancelled for a number of units within the US military, that others are being put into extensive training and confidential training. And there's no doubt with this kinetic activity in Iran, the US needs to prepare for all circumstances. And certainly it's very hard to see how they're going to have, firstly, regime change in Iran without having some presence on the ground, and we can come to that in a minute. But secondly, how they can actually ensure that the mission goal of removing any nuclear facilities is guaranteed. I mean, they did it previously with the bunker buster. It worked to an extent, but not enough. And so there are many factors at play, and this has got some way to go.
All right, let's talk about regime change, because we thought at the beginning of this war 9 days ago that was part of the mission here. But I thought that was pretty significantly walked back by Marco Rubio when he said it was knocking out the nuclear facilities and the missiles, and if the Iranian people want to rise up, well, that's a great thing. So are we clear, Mr. Hockey, about what the goal of regime change or dilution of a regime is? What is it?
Well, there's no doubt that Donald Trump wants to see the end of the Islamic regime. The challenge is, I mean, how far he is prepared to go to enforce that. We have no doubt that Israel will go as far as it needs to go to deliver regime change. Everyone around Washington, D.C. is hoping that Mossad has a plan, because it doesn't appear that the US has a standing plan for an alternative to the current regime. So everyone's hoping that Mossad has a plan. And if there's anything more toxic for the Iranian people than the US imposing a new leader on Iran, it would be Israel imposing a new leader on Iran. So it's a very difficult situation to navigate going forward. There is no obvious successor. Iran has just announced, I understand officially, that the son of the former leader is to become the new leader of Iran. And Israel has already said that if that's the case, he won't have long to live. Now, there is no doubt that the current leadership of Iran, or the leadership 7 days ago, has been decapitated. And that, perhaps many layers further down have been removed as well. I have no doubt that over the last few days, there's been deep divisions within that leadership about who to nominate, with a view that perhaps the only way the Islamic Republic could survive is if they sue for peace with the United States. It wouldn't work with Israel. And perhaps if Donald Trump has accelerated domestic pressures here in the United States, he'll want to sue for peace. I don't see that happening. I think he's gone too far now. And there's no doubt in my mind that, the next few days are going to continue to be more complicated than they have been to date, because until now it's been pretty simple. Take out these key sites and do everything you can to decapitate the regime. But going forward, it's a much more complicated scenario, and it involves huge economic impacts, not just for Iran and the Middle East, but potentially for the world.
Indeed, and it's got more complicated just 9 days in. You see the Gulf states targeted, the pressure they are under, Saudi Arabia, UAE, just to name a few. Also, Donald Trump said of Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader, that that's an unacceptable selection. Well, I'm not sure what an acceptable selection would be, or whether there would be anyone in the regime willing to negotiate with him. But you talk about the economic impact for the world. Joe, I'm looking at the ASX that's just opened. It is down more than 3%, 3.19% at the open. That's $90 billion wiped off our share market in just the last half an hour. What is Australia's calculation here? Are we just really sitting ducks in all of this?
Well, we're not sitting ducks, but we're also not involved in the battle. The fact is, these events occur from time to time. That's why we have to have a resilient Australian economy. That's why you need to have budgets that are in surplus. That's why you need to save money and not keep spending. That's why you've got to stop borrowing money to hand it out, because these rainy days keep coming and coming and coming, whether it's COVID, whether it's a GFC, whether it's war, whether it's anything else, drought. These events keep coming. And, the only way to inoculate yourself against the volatility of the world, and it is going to get more volatile, is to have money for a rainy day, and to be able to make sure you can help get your people through it. Now, those Middle Eastern states that you mentioned, they all have significant cash surpluses. They can cope. Their economies will recover. There's no doubt about that. But for the rest of the world, and many countries that are very vulnerable to rising oil prices, it's a very different story. And so I think Australia has always been engaged in the Middle East. I mean, from the charge in Beersheba, which Australians led back in 1917, we've been there. We've been in the middle of it. It affects us. It really does. Most significantly, it affects China. And I think there is a vulnerability. And I think the most significant event of this year will be the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in just a couple of weeks. Because there's only one thing that Xi Jinping will be looking at, and that is whether Donald Trump reacts badly to the potential for China to take Taiwan. I mean, that's the only thing he's focused on. There'll be lots of talk about trade and everything else, but, it will be the interface behind the scenes between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping that'll have the greatest impact over the next 1 to 2 years, and that will happen in the next 2 weeks.
What do we read into Donald Trump's actions so far as to what his reaction might be if China does retake Taiwan?
Well, it would be very hard to read, Laura. I mean, one of the things that I'm very focused on is understanding where US senators are at. They are absolutely crucial lot of these situations. And, you know, in many ways, US senators have been more forward-leaning in defending Taiwan than any of the presidents. But we now have an entirely new environment. The United States and Israel, you know, by their own hand and by their own decision, went to Iran because Iran represented a threat. I don't know that China could argue the same, but there's no doubt in my mind that Xi Jinping will be trying to read Donald Trump and get a better feel of whether Donald Trump, of how Donald Trump would react to a potential Chinese takeover of Taiwan.
Well, again, the world waits. We wait in anticipation of that meeting. You're right. It will be one of the meetings to watch. Joe Hockey, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for that.
Thanks very much, Laura. Thank you.